Welcome again to the WCA What's Hot, What's Not 2021. This is our 22nd annual event. And this time we're going to focus on what does it make sense to invest in wireless technologies for industrial IoT. My name is Jeremy Toll. I'm the Vice President of the WCA. My contact info is in the on the slide here. WCA is an organization founded in 1994 as a nonprofit business league dedicated to collaboration in the wireless industry worldwide. Our mission here is networking people. We'd like to thank our sponsors, Asville, Google, CIG, Voller, ETI, Woodside Capital, and others. We're always looking for additional sponsors. If you find this, this webinar and other webinars we're doing to be valuable, we'd love to have a discussion with you about sponsorship. We have upcoming events. This will be our final event of 2021. Our next event is an annual event called Spectrum 5G in January. We have another annual event that's 6G, highlighting the spectrum of 95 gigahertz and above in February. We're also doing a global wireless startup pitch event in March of 2022, and another annual event on wireless power transfer and energy harvesting in April. And a perennial event as well in the fall is an Oktoberfest with Industrial IoT Gizmos and Gadgets in September. And next year, this time, will be their 23rd annual What's Hot. So welcome you to join any or all of those. We're almost there. A couple of housekeeping things. We ask that you use Zoom's QA section for questions. The presentations and recordings will be available within 48 hours. And we'd like to greet the world and thanks for you all to be our guests. And if you'd like to speak or sponsor or participate in any way with WCA, please contact sponsor@wca.org. We'll also be having a raffle around 5:20 Pacific time. We're going to raffle off some barbecue gloves that for grilling that can actually protect you against 932 degrees of Fahrenheit of heat. So that's what's hot. So without further ado, we'd like to introduce our moderator who's been doing this for this will be her 8th year, and she's fantastic. Lisa Oshima, who's the founder and managing consultant of Socialize Mobilize. Lisa, take it away.
Thanks, Jeremy, and welcome everybody. Really excited to be here. I was looking back at my emails, trying to figure out how many years I've been doing this, and eight years is a long time. Very happy to be here again. We are going to be talking today about what is hot and what is not in the world of wireless. And this panel is really going to be putting a finger on the pulse of the world of wireless communications. So I'm going to kick things off by doing some introductions, starting with myself. For those of you who don't know me, I've been a consultant in the Silicon Valley for nearly 20 years, specializing in business development, strategy, and growth for emerging tech startups. I help companies leverage partnerships, establish product market fit, grow into new markets, and establish platforms. I specialize in a bunch of different areas, but my current areas of interest include wireless tech, artificial intelligence, including computer vision, platform growth, and Web3, things like blockchain and crypto. We're joined today by some phenomenal panelists. So as I say your name, panelists, if you could please briefly introduce yourself. Starting off with Tricia, who's joining us for the past few years, who's recently changed roles. So Tricia, kick things off for us, if you will.
Sure. So my name is Tricia Solinaro. I'm a managing director of a company called Stout. Stout is a Midwestern investment bank and advisory firm. I would say it's, 2/3 of the business is providing things like quality of earnings and due diligence around technology and financials. And then there's an investment banking group. And I run the TMT practice. I'll say heavy on the T, the first T, which is technology. I've done 100 transactions across the technology spectrum, from where the software hits the hardware on up through SaaS and services, and have been in the Valley for 25 plus years, working with technology companies, and super happy to join the panel again this year, with everyone to talk about wireless and industrial IoT.
Thank you so much for being here, Tricia. Next, we'll move on to Henry.
Hey, my name is Henry Huang. I'm with TDK Venture. TDK Corporation is a Japanese multinational company, used to be famous for making the world's best cassette product. But now TDK is indeed a world leader in electronic material, electronic component, sensor technology, battery, and renewable energy. TDK Venture is a 200 million venture capital arm for TDK Corporation. We invest globally in early stage startups, hard tech startups. And our portfolio company is shown in my background. You can see we invest in robotics and aerospace, material science, AI chips, and battery technology as well. I come from a wireless networking background. I've worked with startup companies in the Valley and the mobile operators. It is my pleasure to join today's session, and looking forward to exchange ideas on a very interesting topic.
Thank you, Henry. Moving on to Yi.
Hi, everyone. My name is Yi. I'm a senior vice president at a investment bank. We're a middle market investment bank called Cascadia Capital, based here in Seattle. Our focus, my focus here at the firm, is twofold. So the first one is sitting across sort of renewables and sustainability. And then the second hat that I wear is around our Industry 4.0 practice. And within Industry 4.0, we have robotics, automation, AI. I am the IoT coverage officer for the firm. I also sit on the board of an organization here in the Washington State area called the Washington State IoT Council. The premise of that group is to make the Pacific Northwest sort of a center for IoT. There's a lot of larger organizations like Microsoft, Amazon, T-Mobile, Ericsson that are all sort of co-chairing the organization with me.
Great. And Mark, joining us from Woodside.
Yes, Mark Bagley from Woodside Capital Partners. Woodside is a mid-sized tech-focused M&A advisory based in Silicon Valley. We delight in having areas of expertise, and my particular delight is infrastructure, which is telco stuff. I'll come on to that bit in a minute, and then cloud infrastructure. I'm a software guy by trade, so I tend to lead in that direction. We mostly focus on sell side, so selling companies, but we do a bit of buy side, and then a smattering of capital raise as well as the focus of areas. So the reason that the telco bias for me is that prior to Woodside, I ran corporate development for British Telecom, BT, for a number of years. And so I've been in the Valley doing that for and meeting companies for about 15 years prior to Woodside.
Great, thank you. And Rajiv?
So I'm Reggie Madhuman. I'm the general partner and founder of a venture fund called Clear Ventures. Came to the Valley in 90 and 91. I did my first startup from 91 to 2012 with 4 startups that I was founder of. 2 of them had an exit very quickly in the 300 million range. And then I ran a public company called Magma. 2 of them went public. So I've basically had 2 exits, which were on the IPO market, and 2 on the acquisition side. Most of those companies were in the semiconductor and EDA. The last company I did, Magma, went public and was the 4th largest electronic design automation software company in the world. Since then, in 2015, traded the hand from being an entrepreneur to a vulture capitalist and joined the VC community, setting up Clear Ventures in 2016, which is a 350 million seed and Series A funds. We have a number of companies in infrastructure and a number of companies in AI related things. We also have done some things in semiconductor, which is a core competency that we had in the very past years of our life as well, right?
So we've got 5 really rock star investors, bankers, folks who know what is hot and definitely what is not. So today, as we kick things off here, I'm going to start the conversation, but I want people in the audience to feel free to ask questions in the chat and raise your hands if you'd like to ask a question. And we're going to have some of the WCA folks, Jeremy, Tom, and Marcel helping out here with moderating some of those questions as they come in. So I think the first thing I'm super excited about is to hear about last night, because Yi had his own, you went old school last night. You went back to 2019, maybe early 2020, and had a big event, big being what, Yi, 35 people you mentioned. And so these are, people from all sorts of interesting companies doing all sorts of cool stuff. As one of the early escapees from your own home, can you tell us, how last night was and what sort of hot things people were talking about?
Yeah, no, thank you for that introduction. So we hosted an event last night in the Seattle area for Seattle executives. So we had a number of CEOs and high-level VPs that kind of play in and around sort of the IoT, IT, OT world. The premise of the dinner was to gather all these different companies together that have technologies and really sort of interface, but allow them to potentially make connections, because all of us are trying to figure out how to scale businesses and how to deploy different technologies into the world of digital transformation. And that was what we wanted to do, is provide a venue for people to come together and do that. It certainly helped that being part of the IoT Council that I mentioned earlier, we had big companies like Microsoft, Amazon, Ericsson, NVIDIA were there. And we were all going around sort of a roundtable discussion to see what are some of the constraints and challenges that people are seeing today. And I think some of the themes that we saw were really around supply chain. I think if anyone today is deploying into sort of the IoT world, there is hardware components, and getting chips is extremely scarce. Unless you're a large company like NVIDIA, where you've already acquired a lot of the supply chain early on. So I think a lot of the earlier stage companies are feeling that. Our clients are certainly feeling that. And then some of the other conversation points that we had were around sort of talent acquisition. There's definitely so many people that are from a retention perspective, leaving their jobs, but also how do you compete against some of the larger constituents that are in and around your local markets when they can obviously offer a much higher sort of compensation. And then there are just technological challenges. People talked about scaling businesses, interoperability within various platforms, connectivity. And then one major theme I think worth mentioning is also the ESG sustainability component.
And in terms of ESG, that's a theme that I think has come up again and again over the last many years. I think, Tricia, you have some thoughts on that. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, what you're seeing there.
Well, it's interesting. We're seeing that a third of LPs have some type of ESG policy, in their mandate. So environmental, social, governance. I would say where it's closely mapped with the industrial IoT area is that concept of measurement, right? So companies that are now deploying sensors, aggregating that information, and then offering a service are really the ones that are getting, I think, the higher premiums. So, it's not just about relabeling, sensor and the data that's coming into that. It's no longer are you considered really a hardware company. Maybe you're considered an energy as a service company, right? And that's actually going to give a bit of a premium because you're absorbing the hardware costs, but you are, now offering a recurring revenue business, and investors love to get behind that. So while a third of the LPs are saying, yeah, we're interested in ESG right now, 25% more are saying, yeah, but we're contemplating it in the future. So you're going to see that as a bigger and bigger mandate. And it's really where I think, the investors are going to want to show that they're doing something, environmentally good, socially good, and have higher levels of governance, also good. But specific to industrial IoT, I think that's where we're going to get, a little bit of an uptick in multiples, which have already doubled, by the way, in, the size of, seed and early stage and late stage pre-money valuations over the last 5 years. But I think you're also going to get an uptick from that kind of ESG, value.
It is really interesting to look around. For years and years, everyone's been saying hardware is hard, and a lot of people have been scared off, especially in the investment world, of hardware companies, right? But we're seeing a lot more of that now, based upon what I've heard from Tricia and others. Have any of you also seen interesting things happening in the world of hardware, where in order to sort of create recurring revenue and make themselves more attractive, these, especially industrial IoT companies and also chip companies are adding really important services pieces on top of their hardware businesses to make themselves more attractive? Do any of you see that trend happening in companies you've been looking at?
So from my perspective, the hardware can be composed into two sets. One is very large digital chips that are being done today, the likes of AI processors, and what I call the lower geometry but more complex in terms of the circuit topology are things which are in the RF analog mixed signal kind of device category, right? In the first one, these are all AI processor companies. They started building AI processor, realized that to sell into the community now with 3 cloud providers, you have to be in the cloud. You cannot just sell it on-prem like the olden days where I made a big microprocessor and everybody could build their own thing. So you have to sell into the cloud. Hence, they all are morphing into taking something like PyTorch or TensorFlow and creating a ML or AI as a service, for example, and they're becoming a software company with their system enabling. And now, by the way, that while tons of money is going into that space, the success is going to be yet to be written up. We think it's a pretty bad investment, which we have stayed away mainly because the amount of money needed for these digital chips is like 200 to 500 million to just do the chip. Now talk about the software complexity of the company. That's $1 billion worth of investment that needs to go in. On the other side, which is these analog mixed signal edge compute kind of chips that are out there, many of them are incorporating some elements of software, but it's very, very difficult to get paid on that software side because The differentiation is these are drivers, these are enabling technologies rather than software as a service. So it's to make hardware as a service model, that is becoming a much of a challenge. There are very few successes out there. There are people beginning to talk, but at the end of it, how do you monetize it if you're trying to amortize the cost of it into a service, into a software, is much tougher for the second category of chips. For the first category, it's easy, but the complexity of the software and the chip is such that you will have to do a lot of money to do that.
Totally. Anybody else have any thoughts on this?
Well, only that it's that whole discussion there, it sounds so artificial, right? But I mean, it's becoming an obsession with investors. They're desperate to find recurring revenue because it's just a sure bet that if you're making 20 million this year, you're making 20 million next year, at the start of the year. So it's that's what's driving the whole thing. It just makes it an easy investment, I guess. Yeah,
and interesting that we talk about these hardware companies and services and what's happening in wireless. It seems to me to be becoming more and more decentralized. Everything's becoming more decentralized. So it's not so much about just the wireless network anymore. It's about the edge, and not just the edge as we used to talk about the edge in wireless terms, but now edge devices and edge computing and tiny ML and all these other things. What are you guys seeing in terms of I know a lot of you aren't working directly with telcos and wireless companies, but I am kind of curious to get your thoughts on where this is all headed as it relates to wireless. Are you seeing opportunities to engage with these edge-based computing companies and having those impact ultimately the way that the wireless is progressing?
Well, I want to get back to the hardware topic here. Is the way there are opportunities for hardware company into the wireless space, and the hardware need to be combined with software. Give an example of, say, okay, at the wireless RAN domain, you see an open RAN and transform of the network, and this really opened the door for like a group of new virtualized, cloud-based open source software opportunities in the 5G network space. And this brings the new entrants and startup opportunities, and they are really combine the hardware piece and the software piece in their solution offerings, and typically those areas are really dominant by big incumbent and not much space for startups. Now we see company like Mavenir, Parallel Wireless, Altiostar, and really have a combination of software and hardware and product. Then with the evolving of the technology, really getting into the space, and which also is a major use case for edge computing as well. You see those kind of the open RAN base station baseband component are really a optimum solutions for edge computing application.
So just answering that question one step further, it's actually what is happening is the software and hardware is actually getting desegregated in the case of native cloud computing. So you have the RAN, the hardware may be coming from Intel or their FPGA plus compute solution, or some other startups, or AMD trying to get into the process, or Intel getting into the process. They are all behind because FlexRAN today certainly has the leadership in the RAN space. But then there are people who have taken FlexRAN like Altiostar, Mavenir, etc., and run their own RAN solutions. And then there are companies like we have a company called Robin.io, which is the orchestration platform used by Rakuten, and runs Altiostar on all of their nodes, whether the node is for RAN or whether the node is compute edge. So you're going to see software getting completely, it used to be, when you were using Ericsson, Nokia, and some of these big players like Huawei, everything was clubbed in with custom silicon. And today the silicon has been disaggregated, the hardware is getting disaggregated, and the software is getting disaggregated. Specialized elements in software using AI for RAN optimization, network optimization, all of that is just beginning to happen as this umbilical cord has gotten cut. It's very much like what happened in cloud. In cloud, Once we got the x86 GPU, etc., and software and hardware has gone on its specialized way. Hardware may progress at a given time. Software will come to the peak of the threshold, and we are in that same cycle with the telco world right now. And RAN is a classic example of doing that.
Yeah, I agree with Rajiv. Sorry, Lisa.
No,
Just
go on.
on the orchestration and the cloud native, I think that is very, very, I think, on the cutting edge today, and people are looking at that. Not only are the software companies looking at that, are software investors, I think also the hardware focused guys are. I do want to address sort of from an IoT perspective, because clients that we have in the IoT struggle with this, right? Because when we go to investors, they're commonly asking, what does the recurring revenue stream look like? But when you actually look at the revenue streams of these companies, there's three components. It's usually hardware, software, and services. But I would argue that the premise of these companies, that the IoT companies are really after data. It's really, what do you do with that data? And you've seen these evolutions. So it used to be just about connectivity and getting access to either the asset or understanding what is it doing. Is it here? Is it on? Is it performing? But really being able to do something else on top of that with AI ML. So you commonly see this, IoT company is starting to transition into more of an AI ML company, but there still is the legacy business that they can't totally sort of separate from that. And I think that's some of the challenges that some of the investors are kind of coming at it from.
I think you make an excellent point. I do see a lot of interesting things happening in the world of AI and data. I'm curious to hear, as you guys look at this, where's room for the little guy? There's obviously these big companies are snapping companies up left and right. And, Tricia mentioned before, just the multiples are insane. Is there room still for innovation at that startup level? Or are we really seeing, big companies spinning off innovation arms or buying up what there is to buy up as fast as they possibly can, and then trying to build their own? Do you guys see any opportunity for startups in this increasingly complex space?
So again, I see the opposite of what you're saying right now, Lisa. I think eventually there'll be more purchases of these companies that are getting formed. In the area of software, just taking RAN side, right? You had Altiostar, which got bought recently, certainly, no doubt. Mavenir is there. And there are some of the other companies which are big, but growing. But the next level of software companies are just hitting the market. These are companies which are using AI for RAN, network optimization, network management, AI in some form or shape being used to do that. There are companies on orchestration like our Robin.io. There are companies on network. We have a company, Arcus, which is in network, desegregated, distributed network operating systems rather than just running on one switch or one router, being able to commoditize that and being able to run it on multiple hybrid cloud is the next wave. So we are just at the stage where there's a lot of good startups. The challenge for these startups in the telco world is the telco customers move with a 9-month to a 12-month cycle, right? It's not a 3-month cycle.
Speedy? It's not speedy.
Speedy, but 9 months is
more like 2 to 3 years.
Not as speedy as it needs to be. So you really need to be able to fund that kind of 9 months to 12 months of BD and it's not BD alone, because you actually have people on the foot trying the system, have to put sales engineers in play much before anything else. So the activity and the expense is pretty large. And so it's actually much easier if you're an enterprise software company and you see telco as an add-on, and you can add a few variations to doing this, right? Because of the cut in software and hardware, it's interesting. The same companies which are doing things in the cloud will be able to do things in the network and in the telco world with some changes and some adaptations that need to be done. So we are at a stage where the names that were not common in telco is going to be part and parcel of the telco flows and frameworks that use. Security is going to be the same. When you go to network cloud security, there's more options from the cloud security world and the edge cloud security world that can apply to this side as well. So we're going to see a lot of startups cross over and see that telco is not a bad space to be in if you can afford the space of 9 months to get your first few activities and get to build a cadence over a period of time.
And I think we're going to start to see,
yeah,
sorry,
but-
Mark,
No,
then we're
you
going to
go
start
ahead.
to see more of these over the next year, to 24 months, because there was early stage seed funding back in the 2018, 2019 category. There's a little blip there in terms of increased funding in industrial IoT in particular. And so, as those companies sort of weathered COVID, and the increased selling times in some cases, the lack of getting to the right talent in place, finding talent as we're watching all of these job hoppers happening, including myself, sorry. I think we're going to see more in 2022 as these companies start to raise their heads and are looking for that Series B for the next stage, after rebranding themselves in some cases as a service company, right? As some companies like Samsara have really exceptionally done.
Mark, was there something you wanted to add there?
Yeah, a couple of things. I mean, on the very edge, I think, whatever that device is, whether it be a sophisticated thing like a laptop or a phone or even just a sensor, I think we're going to see some clever innovation around how tasks are handled on the edge, whether that be an AI task or some kind of automation task. So I think there's something's going to happen there for sure that we haven't yet got that's going to make that a lot easier. Maybe it's the zero code folks are going to get in there and try and make it easy to code onto those devices and get them to do things. And then I wonder whether there's, we've got this whole multi-cloud now, which includes, you would include the edge in that. So we've got like the end device, we've got, maybe we've got on-premise, maybe we've got telco cloud, the telco edge, and then we've got the public clouds in all those multi-clouds. I wonder whether there's going to be some level of higher level operating system that runs across those. We've already got some kind of lower level things, the Kubernetes and the bits and pieces that Google and Microsoft and Amazon, for that matter, are doing to kind of integrate and orchestrate the network pieces as well across those two. And I wonder whether we'll end up with a distributed, I guess, Linux is distributed anyway, but you know what I mean? It's a kind of an operating system that runs over that's more of a high level. And again, maybe it is the zero codey type people that's going to put some kind of automation across the top of that to make that whole thing easy. Because we're on this cycle of going. We thought going to the cloud was going to make things easy, but now we're moving back from the cloud to a more distributed. And of course, how's that different from a few years ago when we moved away from it? Well, the difference is we've got a lot of more automation and AI sitting in the way now that makes the whole process a lot more simple to put things together. So I think that whole area is going to be very interesting.
So Mark, this problem of having edge and being able to manage devices and applications across the edge, across the on-prem, across your native cloud, or if you're a telco vendor with your own cloud, or across using any of the public clouds, that's exactly what the solution that, for example, these new companies that I mentioned provide. Robin has a product called MDCap, which is exactly tailored at that. Network operating systems and being able to distribute the network operating system where your network now needs to stretch from your cloud to somebody else's cloud, to somebody else's edge. And there's an edge device which is being connected by somebody who's, let's say, just an operator, has no idea what the software is. The system has to come in from the cloud and upload the operating system, upgrade it. All that is what these companies are offering that we have seen. Some of them we have funded, but this is exactly, and these are all things that, by the way, in the cloud world has been done, because you have distributed cloud and you have cloud in some place where there is electricity at a cheap rate, and you don't have the skilled labor to be sitting in there. You've got somebody coming in and just connecting a dark fiber, and everything comes in from the cloud central space and loads it. That is now getting small, making the footprint small so you can run on edge, being able to bring in up and connect a device. But that's exactly what some of these companies that we have seen are doing, and it's there. Some of them are already being applicable and has been used by some of the telcos to manage the network in a much more cost-effective function.
Yeah, we're just at the start of all that, though, as if it was what I was thinking. It's good that there's people I'm sure there are people thinking about it. If I've thought about it, tens of thousands of other people have thought about it, I'm sure. But
yeah,
Yeah, but I think that's going to be a very ripe area where there's going to be, you know, a lot of wealth of innovation going on right across that piece.
Well, and you're thinking about the economics of all of this, right? There's this very complex economic equation, right? Where you've got these really low cost, low power sensors that are sitting out there in the universe. And then those are, made by presumably hardware companies in most cases. And then you have the people who are trying to build on top of those things to do certain stuff, right? And to take that information that those sensors are gathering and bring it back to a central source so that that data can be processed and something can happen with it. And all of these different touch points, these different endpoints, require some level of, whether it's an operating system or interoperability, et cetera, to make it work. The question is how much, and those things are very complicated to build and very expensive to build. And as of a few years ago, people would say, those aren't the kinds, VCs would say, and I'm curious to hear what you think now, those aren't the kinds of things you want to invest in because those are very hard problems that are very hard and very expensive to solve. And then once you solve them, what is the cost to the company that's using that low cost sensor to actually execute upon that goal? So I guess I am asking from the perspective of someone who's been moderating this for several years, do you guys still think those types of companies are more challenged? And obviously not everyone has been here for the last 8 years, but the general consensus was several years ago that these are really hard companies to invest in. What are your thoughts now on those sorts of investments? And where do you see the upside as an investor in these sorts of investments, if there is one?
I'm going to just take a couple of answers on that, which is, if you look at companies like Tile and some of the other companies which have done, services to actually distribute and ship items, right? I mean, there are a number of companies which have come in that space. And so they're basically packages as a service is what they're providing for DHL and other people, sensors that sit on top of it, and sensors that should not have any batteryless sensors that can technology. We have a company whose customers are some of these companies that are using them. But the question is, it's not one company which is going to solve all of that. You're going to have somebody who's providing specialist technology in the chip side for lowest power, batteryless kind of things. Somebody's going to provide the service. When you provide the service, the question which not a lot of people have thought about is what's the volume and how can you share the revenue stream with, in this particular case, carriers who are shipping your product, right? So you have to have value items like, okay, the box was flipped, so insurance rates are different, etc. Some of these are getting solved, but to go end to end and be able to solve it and then extract value, it's a tough problem to do. It's a very complex thing to have a software or a chip to do a portion of it. They put it in a concise service, and then sometimes you do those like the companies like Tile did, and then obviously you will have Apple come about 2 or 3 years behind and do the same and desegregate or make your market go away in some sense. So this is the challenge of this whole space. Right?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, right? Because you see all sorts of companies, and including telecoms companies, who are trying to do that sort of thing, riff upon what Tile is doing, and great plans are always difficult to put into execution when Apple comes along and tries to do the exact same thing. So,
Rajiv, I thought you were going to talk about Atmosic.
Yeah, so it's a very unique company in that space. For example, we have a company, so we haven't seen a service company that we have funded end to end, but we have taken in infrastructure pieces in that and tried to automate. We have a company called Atmosic, which has Bluetooth and in the next version, more than that, any wireless protocol, being able to use batteryless chips. Because in IoTs, if you had batteries, all you will be doing is changing batteries from one end to the other of the IoT network, right? So this is completely changes that. It takes battery power from RF energy in the 900 megahertz, 2.4 gigahertz range, in the same ranges as wireless Wi-Fi, and be able to charge it up. And the challenge of doing that is, and it's got an ARM processor in it for things like headphones, universal remotes, and a lot of things. It's a great technology, and it has to do a lot of innovation inside software, because what happens when you have no RF signal for a few days? Well, when you go down and come up, it's a big challenge. You have to push the workload into the cloud. So these are, while these are very interesting, it's a great technology in terms of hardware. The technology in terms of software that goes into those hardware companies is actually pretty big as well.
So I'm looking at some of these other companies that what I would consider competitive to Atmosic, and what they're thinking about doing is creating more of a marketplace, right? So if you can have a million billion of these sensors that are out there that you don't have to change the batteries, then they stay out there. But really having other developers, right? And this goes back to Lisa, your question around interoperability and potentially open source, being able to add different technologies or different software applications. You can either containerize or Kubernetes and add them to that sort of network and platform, then that makes that scalability extremely easy. And then the next step, I think, beyond that is really in terms of wireless power. So there are a lot of wireless power companies that have come and gone, I think, through the last decade. And I think the challenges there really were around regulatory issues. So they're still not fully operational from that perspective. There are companies that are out there that are trying to do it and that have made some headway. And I think that you will probably be reading about some in the future. I can't tell you exactly which ones, but hinting at it, that there will be some wireless power transfer companies that may be meaningful from an industrial, consumer, retail product perspective.
Yeah, I mean, from the IoT spaces, right? I mean, for Atmosic, this has been a very good year. I mean, we're basically increasing our volume with all of our people in terms of manufacturing capacity that we have signed up for, because we have, next year we're going to have a lot of universal remotes that don't need charging. I mean, I'm sure all of you at home, when you have these remotes that you want to use, at that time, it won't have a battery charge, right? And that's one of the headaches, and that's gone. Headphones, I mean, I forget to charge it for a day, I can't go for my run. All of that kind of solutions are going to go away. And that's a fantastic capability for this new innovation that is going to hit the ground running. I mean, it's next year is probably going to be seeing a lot of applications that use this technology.
Well, Rajiv, I think you just made everyone's night. I mean, honestly, that would be amazing. We've been talking about wireless power for a really long time. I think it might have been the third or fourth or maybe even fifth year we've talked about wireless power on this particular panel. And, I am very curious to hear not only what both Yi and Rajiv think, but also Tricia, Henry, Mark. Anybody seen anything really cool in the world of wireless power of late besides Atmosic? Not immediately.
Oh.
All right. We had a question from the crowd. I think there was a person named Al in the crowd who put his hand up, and I wondered if maybe Jeremy, you could call upon Al to ask his question. Al, you're up if you.
You're up, but on mute.
Yeah.
All right, maybe we come back to Al a little bit later. Al, if you still have your question, perhaps you could just ask Jeremy to pipe you back in through the chat. So taking a step back to just the core wireless, we've hit on a couple of really interesting things that have been happening. I think a lot of this comes back to getting back to wireless itself. 5G, we've talked about 5G again every year for the last probably 10 years. I mean, it's been a long time. And in talking about 5G, it seems as though we've been talking about it for a long time. The only beneficiaries, if this is fair, of 5G have really been a lot of the industrial IoT and sort of more industrial businesses trying to leverage this stuff. Are you seeing any? I mean, what's the current landscape looking like for 5G? Are we talking about 6G yet? I mean, like, what is this all looking like for you guys at this point?
I better start, seeing as I'm the telco guy, and defend 5G or not defend 5G.
Please, Mark, please.
Yeah, so it's I don't know, the whole topic of this session is it hot or is it not? And I'd say you've got to say it's not at the moment. I mean, who could say it is hot? We've had 3 years where nothing really has happened, and maybe it's 10 years, but it's I think it's only 3 since it was launched. But
COVID times, Mark, it feels like
10. Yeah, of course, yeah, we double. That's right. So it's at least 6 years then. Yeah, so that's right. Well, it's a bit of a mess, isn't it? Because there's all this hype about how fantastic, we all know that the 3 things it's going to provide, which is low latency and much higher bandwidth. and as consumers, of course, do we need low latencies and high bandwidth? No, we don't. We need probably connectivity. It's not having 4G wherever we need it is what we wanted, and not the higher bandwidths. And so, and I think it's when you look at 5G, it's partly not the telco. Well, it is the telco's fault. They hyped it up, but you know, it all comes down to if there's nothing that if there's something that you take away from this, my soon to be rant here about 5G is that it's about spectrum. So just remember, it's about spectrum. So we got a session on spectrum. Actually, the WCA got an event in January on spectrum. You'll note it. So do tune into that for more details. But just at the high level, the spectrum that was given to the telcos ended up being not ideal. I don't know whether you're familiar with this, but they got given millimeter wave spectrum, and turns out this only goes like 5 feet. Okay, I'm exaggerating a little bit, but it's highly hampered by obstacles in the way, and so turns out you have to have 12 times the number of cell towers to get this to work. So not surprisingly, we haven't seen much 5G kicking around, and you'll find it very hard to actually get a 5G service on your phone. And so so that's where we are. But the good news is, bad news for the telcos is they just spent an awful lot of money. I think something like 60 billion, you know, depending, and then more for rollout on some new spectrum. And this spectrum looks much better. This is the C-band spectrum. So if you hear C-band, that's the new 5G. And so good news is we're going to be able to get all the benefits. We get low latency, we get high bandwidth, high speed, and we get more importantly for IoT, we're getting this high capacity as well. And so look out for that. But unfortunately, it's going to be another 3 years of hype, I think, while we do this. And but all three of the providers here in the US have now bought some spectrum. It's well used across globally as well. So we might see some 5G rolling out here, but I don't think that millimeter wave is going to be the answer. That's the spectrum that was supposed to be the panacea of all ills. But millimeter waves still get used, I think. It's being used for fixed wireless. So you know, you've probably seen that T-Mobile and Verizon are still pushing ahead with a direct service over 5G, direct to give you broadband. And then we've got laptops. I believe rumored laptops are coming out next year with 5G embedded as well in the laptops. And so you'll be able to get direct broadband service wherever you are for this, you know, work from anywhere type regime. So that'll probably kick off 5G a little bit. But in terms of the original use cases for 5G, I think we're still on the same use cases. I think we're still looking for applications that are going to need a lot of bandwidth. And I think that's not going to be on the consumer side. So all these advertisements, commercials to see on TV, I think probably wasting the time, because I'm not sure that's where the market is. The market's still on the industrial side. I'm not sure we're ever going to get to, you know, an autonomous vehicle going down the highway and reliant on 5G coverage to drive the vehicle. I think I'm more, but you know, maybe in the future. I mean, these things take time. So so don't give up on 5G just yet. I would say it's not hot at the moment, but you know, we've got another chance here with some more spectrum where I think there's potential for 5G to get rolled out a bit more expansively and be able to use.
Mark, we've talked about private 5G networks before, though. I mean, I think that's a use case that might make more sense, right?
Yeah, and that's interesting because the very fault of millimeter wave is it hardly goes anywhere. You know, it's obstructed by trees and buildings. There's this line of sight aspect with the millimeter wave, but you stick that inside a building, and you know that's going to be fine. You know, you stick it in a manufacturing plant, it's going to work fine inside of there, and the benefit wouldn't go outside the building. So therefore, you can reuse those frequencies over and over again. And there are people providing private networks. And it's not new. There's been private 4G networks as well. But on the spectrum that 4G was being used, of course, it goes outside the building. Then you get issues with it. It interferes with the signal outside. And so the telcos who pay a lot of money for this licensed spectrum, you know, don't like that. But yeah, the benefit of having the 5G there versus Wi-Fi, of course, 5G is licensed spectrum, Wi-Fi is unlicensed. And so anyone going past in a 1950s vehicle or a lawnmower is going to interfere with your manufacturing plant, which is not ideal, I'm guessing. So yeah, so make sure you get those widgets done before the gardeners come in and move the lawnmower outside. So yeah, so I think that's got legs for sure, and it's definitely got legs for AT, I talked about Verizon, so just continuing on millimeter wave, just so it's not, it's not a dead duck, but it's definitely going to be used for broadband, and even AT&T are going to use it as a hybrid model as well. So fiber to the wherever, the curb or something, and then use wireless to get to the house.
One thing that I have seen a lot more recently is around tele operations, whether it's tele operations within like the supply chain in a warehouse, someone driving a forklift from a remote location, or it's even driving wireless vehicles. I don't know, Mark, how those are connected, but if it is through LTE or some sort of cellular, then having higher latency conceptually makes sense. And I think that, tele operations is sort of the middle step before you go full autonomy, right? So
yeah, and I don't know they're connected either. I mean, if I was doing anything autonomous, I'd be more reliant on, assuming the network's there, I'd be more reliant on 5G than Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is fine, but it's the slight unreliability every now and then where it can be interfered with, just because it's nothing to do with the Wi-Fi and the Wi-Fi standards. It's just on a licensed spectrum, so you can't really control who's broadcasting on that spectrum. That's the only issue with Wi-Fi. But the downside is, of course, you have a private network, and you probably need to get someone in to do that. It's not something you can go down to the local, Home Depot or somewhere and buy a private 5G network and then take it home and put it in. So it's a little bit different. Maybe someone should get onto that. Yeah.
So we have some questions from the audience, which I'm going to go to here, from Kevin Cameron. I recently attended an IEEE talk about applying AI to massive MIMO. Is anyone investing in that?
So actually on this MIMO side and applying, applying on the MIMO side and massive MIMOs and using AI to figure out what's the topology that for a particular user or particular edge device. These are investments at the system level. These are investments which are going to take a lot of money in terms of what needs to be done. I mean, there were a few companies which were attempting to do basically Wi-Fi as a service, right? The last one was bought by Juniper, but there's been a whole pile of them that have been. Meraki started the first acquisition of some of these managed Wi-Fi services. If you go and say, I'm just doing AI for MIMO Wi-Fi, that alone, I don't think is going to make anybody excited. If you're saying because of that, I'm going to redefine wireless as a service, that may be an interesting proposition. If you're just making that one portion, which is AI as a MIMO, you have 3 or 4 customers that you can go and sell to, because that's what the Wi-Fi MIMO devices makers are going to be, right? So you need, so we have looked at a few of them, which is pure hardware and or pure, kind of, I can add this AI layer on top of it as a marketplace for some of these Wi-Fi service companies that's out there. That's very, very difficult to build into a standalone company. It's more of a feature on top of an existing set of Wi-Fi services that exists.
Kevin also asks, what about free space optics for more bandwidth?
Yes, definitely, an area that probably needs revisiting. I'm not so sure that, do we have a problem with we need more bandwidth though? That's probably where I go to. So free space optics for sure, yes. I mean, it's been used in the past. I'm sure that will come to the fore again.
Another question from an audience member, and I'm sorry, I'm going to probably mispronounce your name, Simon. What do you think about 5G used as an alternative to fiber broadband? Is fixed wireless broadband on sub-6 a real alternative to wireline-based broadband?
Yes and no. I touched on that a little bit, right? So Verizon, went big on this, and and I've made a lot of progress. In fact, the first, I think on 4G even as well, that the first thing they did was they went down the fixed wireless side of things to provide broadband, and T-Mobile are doing the same. You probably see some advertisements for that as well, using this C-band is what T-Mobile are using. I think Verizon are persisting, but now they've got some more spectrum in the C-band. The mid-band thing is they'll probably persist in that, but also they've been doing it for a while on millimeter wave as well. So that's a definite possibility. There's I think there's a lot more scope for innovation there. It's because there's still issue, and maybe this is an AI thing, maybe it's a MIMO piece, but there's a lot of work to be done around managing the interference there, which is the main problem why millimeter wave doesn't work. It's getting blocked and it's getting reflections and then the interference there. So there's a company called Tarana Wireless. You probably know Tarana Wireless, but it's been around for a little bit. But they figured out how to model, I guess, record and model interference, because a good chunk of the interference is kind of repeated interference, and so you can kind of you can remove that interference using some clever AI. And so I think there's a lot of scope for doing something there, and that would be very welcome by the telcos. I think you get a lot of investment from the telcos there if you want to go down that route.
Well, I would add to that is if you're talking about the fixed wireless broadband, if we use the sub-6 spectrum, and there's always a throughput limit. I mean, because of the limited spectrum, and depending on what kind of customer it is. If you are talking about customers in the United States, I mean, the kind of throughput people used to hear, probably sub-6 won't be able to get it, regardless what technology you use. And if you go to some of the developing countries, yes, there could be opportunities for those kind of technology. For countries like US, if we're really gonna have the compatible broadband access, then it has to go to a millimeter wave kind of spectrum. But the challenge of millimeter wave, as Mark mentioned, that it's really it just doesn't go very far and has obstacles. And the challenge of deploying those kind of things is from the operator perspective is you have to have some kind of like predictability. If I put in nodes in the community, then I'll make sure that 90% of the house is going to be covered. But for higher frequency propagation characteristic, it really present a challenge. I mean, you don't know until you are there. I guess this will be the challenge for millimeter wave. But I think Mark mentioned earlier that the fixed wireless access is probably the biggest use case or real use case for millimeter wave right now. Because if for Verizon and they start doing the small cell for the mobile services, I mean how many people really use those cell phones to the millimeter wave spectrum? It's the killer use case is either going to be industrial and a kind of like private network application, or the fixed wireless.
And the person who asked the question is asking also, what about rural United States?
Yeah, I don't think that's going to cost. I mean, I'm not an expert on the economics, but just thinking about it and how much it costs for all the kit, I don't think that's going to cost in for rural. I think it's going to be Starlink or the other competing services. I think it's probably going to cost in the best there, and they seem to be getting decent speeds as well. You're not going to get gigabit, I guess, but it's a lot better than what they've had already. But it'd be difficult for it to cost in for millimeter wave or even some of the other lower spectrum areas as well.
And I would add to that is probably the market is not big enough for those like really remote areas for operating.
That's right. That's what I meant by costing in. You put a node in, and how many people would it serve? Based on the radius that a millimeter wave or even some of the lower frequency radios can go, it just wouldn't cost him from that. But to serve just 10 people wouldn't work, right? It's got to serve like 10,000 people probably or something.
Yeah.
I'm going to add a question from another participant. Brian has asked. He says he runs a working group for IEEE, and he's looking at 5G and beyond for road mapping, and he's very interested in energy efficiency. And was kind of curious if anyone could comment on how to keep the global ICT energy footprint under control and still be in the purview of those that can implement significant savings. Does anybody have thoughts on that?
There are very big companies that are working, energy savings as an angle, as a service. So you're looking at a company like Redaptive, who's coming in and saying, look, if we put sensors on everything, we can tell you that you are overspending on lighting and HVAC, and that if you convert to LED and turn down here and adjust there, here are both your energy savings, reducing your carbon footprint, and now eligible for ESG money. So back to, how do you get, wrap that all into a package that an investor can consume and feel good about, as part of an investment strategy around IoT, right?
I mean, there have been a number of startups which have tried its luck of home energy optimization. It's been it's yet to show a success in terms of what happens, and many of these ends up being a tuck-in for some company which has got Google Next or anything like that, buying it for home automation / home energy optimization. While it is great, it's been difficult because getting to replump the homes for putting these sensors and then showing the returns or the net impact of those returns has so far been elusive for a lot of these startups.
A lot of companies are trying to attack it from the building and large facility footprint.
Right.
So one of our clients, as an example, they're mostly working with the 100,000 plus square foot on the manufacturing side with either higher education or J&J, Intel, those types of companies. And if you look at the HVAC system, that is the most inefficient system in a building. I think it's 40+%, maybe 60% of the waste is there. And so there are companies, absolutely trying to attack and figure out how to optimize that system from an energy savings perspective. And to Rajiv's point, the biggest challenges to these companies are the long sales cycle. I mean, it could take from start to implementation, it could be 18, 24 months before you're fully up and operational. So there is challenges there. I haven't seen a whole lot of companies being able to scale at the smaller scale quickly, but all the asset owners are looking at it. JLL, CBRE, all the big sort of corporations that have massive amounts of buildings are looking at ways to sort of save there.
And a number of those have made investments into startups in the space. I think the smaller startup community, though, was hit pretty hard by COVID. So they weren't able to get people into the field to do the installation because they couldn't get them on site, or they didn't have back to our supply chain at the very beginning of this conversation, they didn't have the equipment to do the installation. And so they're pushing their revenue recognition and their install and some of their early deposits and money up front is getting pushed out a quarter or 2 quarters. And so I think there's been some interesting impact from that perspective.
So if you put the sensors and you take 18 to 24 months, it makes the sale that I mentioned of 9 to 12 months look like
right,
very good in terms of what it is. But the biggest problem, since this person is working on the ICT Energy Committee, I think the biggest problem is there's no real hard, fast formulas on how to measure. So everybody has their own mechanism of how am I going to measure the efficiency of ABC. So it's the beauty lies, it's almost like a relative POC measurement by the end customer. There is no absolute numbers with which to measure or demonstrate. So you get in with all those sensors and then you get into this confusion of, am I really doing great or not? This is where I hope the IEEE committees come up and say, this is how you measure it, and at least have some level of standardization that exists. It's a difficult problem. I'm not going to say no to that. But if somebody does that, that at least helps these startups maybe cut it from 18 months to 24 months, where you're haggling that you actually did it or didn't do it. So that could be improved if there were better metrics on measuring these things. And it takes a long time to measure and get it convinced to the other side.
And as it relates to 5G, remember that I don't know whether the question was related to 5G, but the big driver of moving to 5G for the telcos was an energy saving, and so they're moving a good chunk of the kit that was at the bottom of the cell tower. They moved that back into the network, and so that's energy savings there as well. So you'll probably be able to find that on the telcos website. I'm sure they're talking about it.
Brian's actually written some stuff in the chat, which is very useful if any of you are interested in that. He's talking about how they've introduced a systems of systems framework to assess exactly as Rajiv described. So thank you for that. We have a couple of other questions here, and I'm going to just move. I'm going to go just for those of you who are in the queue for questions being asked. I'm going to move to the direct question that has something to do with what we're talking about right now, and then I'm going to go back to something that we talked about before. Ken Kelly asks, is the FAA's concerned about 5G interference with GPS a real concern for 5G?
Guess that's directed at me. I don't know much about that. I'll have to come back to you on that. So, yeah.
Okay. Another person, Rick Ellinger, has asked, can you comment on investment opportunities related to Amazon, Apple, SpaceX LEO network?
So I'm not sure about what the question means of Amazon, Apple investing. These are companies which actually are not very active on the investment side of things, right? I mean, or if the person is talking about their networks like sidewalk networks, etc., customers or companies forming to use that. Because on the first side, these are not, or neither is SpaceX a very big investor into startups that I've seen so far. I mean, they may come in and become much more of an active investor in this space, but do not seem to be at this juncture a pretty active people on the Starlink products or anything like that. So having said that, services that can deploy on all of these things, raising money on investments. The only challenge on some of these Amazon and Apple is how the pricing is going to be. If you're going to create a service on top of Apple's or all of these things, and you're going to pay 20-30% to the Apple tax, then you need to work your way backwards on calculating how you're going to be successful in selling in that, right? Because if it's an app that uses that, what's the price point? Those are all becoming very interesting questions that'll become more and more tighter as you go along, because already the margins are getting squished if you're making things so software applications on those networks.
I think we have about 15 more minutes before we pause for the giveaway. So I want to kind of move on to a totally different subject, which is kind of something sort of interesting that Henry was talking about. I think it was Henry was talking about it when we were talking offline. There's a lot that's been happening around digital twins, and digital twins is coming up a lot in the built environment as well as through asset ownership. Love to hear a little bit more about what you think is kind of interesting in that space.
I don't recall I mentioned that, to be honest.
Oh, I may have been somebody else. I apologize if it wasn't me.
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, Yi.
Yeah,
I apologize.
No worries. Yeah, we are seeing quite a bit of that, and in particular with Microsoft was one of the conversations that I had recently with our IoT people. So they are very much looking at it, and there are a lot of startup companies that are looking at how do you potentially get a digital asset, an industrial asset, could be a building, could be a piece of equipment that you can keep through the life of the asset. So that not only helps you understand the repair and maintenance schedule, but it also helps you go back in time to understand, like in the construction phase of a building, what you could do is you could essentially say, this cement block, this metal beam, I know exactly who manufactured it and at what specs, so that if you ever need to do repair or replacement on it, you know exactly who to go to fix that. And so it allows you to see sort of a digital asset, a mirror image of that through the life of the ownership.
So mea culpa, I mean, we have a company in that space as well. I mean, it's a very interesting space. A company called Tignis in Seattle. Seattle seems to be somehow the space for these companies in the digital twin space. So for HVACs and other things, creating a complete digital twin to understand where your efficiency is deviating from normal, what is the error? So you need a physics. It used to be completely physics-based simulation and models that people go through. Instead, if you can create a digital twin and you can see the variation and AI can build a new, more accurate model, you can actually understand what the lifespan is, where the errors are happening. And the same digital technology like Tignis can be used for modeling manufacturing processes like silicon manufacturing, etc., being able to take an equipment, model it, and be able to create a digital twin and understand the efficiency and the operational deviation as it happens versus a physics model. You have a physics model going on, and then you see spurious errors. So you really need to be able to create a digital twin and do that simulation on that basis of a combined digital plus physical simulation.
Interesting. And moving on to kind of a tangential topic as well, one that several folks have mentioned. Let's talk a little bit about security and what's kind of hot in security. We've talked about security in past years and what's been happening around security that's interesting. Have you guys seen anything new and interesting that's worth mentioning in this space?
Again, I think it's an area where there will be a lot of startups in the next couple of years, because when we go to this cloud native, we are opening the Pandora's box. We're basically allowing, the traditional things that have been brought into cloud, and that means also the traditional hacking techniques that have broken into the cloud, into various aspects of cloud, to be applicable on the telco side and network side as well. So there's edge security, there's going to be security of user authentication at different levels on where you are in the network, different devices. So if you have a control tower, and underneath the tower, somebody's bringing in certain devices and connecting it. So we're going to be in a very interesting level. I think the first problem is decoupling software and hardware. We have done that. We've got some efficiencies happening in software and hardware. Next is going to be people getting more and more fearful of what that decoupling and what all that means with respect to security. So it's an area where there are some good solutions in the cloud and edge cloud space that needs to make its way into this kind of an environment, which means, the first few companies who move in that will certainly have an advantage in helping resolve this new kind of a model, where you're using traditional x86 and FPGAs, et cetera, for doing your telco network.
I think conceptually speaking, if you think about sort of the progression of IoT devices and edge devices that have been sort of deployed in the field, all the analysts, expected there to be trillions of devices by now. And, when you look at it now, it's still, 10 years now, that'll be trillions of devices by then. And so if you think about that conceptually, it creates situations where there obviously may be some penetration. So I think it is very important. McKinsey just came out with a report on the IoT and how cybersecurity is, one of the top 3 sort of threats that they need to sort of, manage and figure out. One of the companies that was at the event last night is a company called Tempered.io. They are based here in Seattle. Their thought is, instead of having sort of a restrictive an open to where you restrict, you just automatically deny. So I think there was if you guys take a look at their website, they are different in terms of what I've seen. And so that may be, how you get about this, into the future. But cybersecurity and all aspects of sort of connected devices and the digital transformation, I think people are looking at. And I think at the very onset of, connected devices, the challenges to that is, do you want to keep things sort of in the cloud? Do you want to keep things on-prem? And I think the basis behind that was security.
Yeah, and I'm sure the next wave will come and say, oh, you can't do all the denies, because if you do that, you're going to be a very unhappy customer. So I got an AI solution which determines who's not that. I can tell you what the next presentation I'm going to be seeing.
There's definitely tension between the zero trust network philosophy and we're now starting to see money going into what people are calling data fabrics, right? So I'm going to take all the data entry from, whether it's my industrial IoT device, I'm going to take it from the cameras patrolling outside. I'm going to do some, recognition on that and build a sort of central repository for, identifying threats, for example. And so, early money going and coming from the government. But I suspect that will, filter to all of us, as well as we're trying to get dashboards and aggregate that, right?
The thing is, on the vision side, using cameras and security towers, etc., that is going to see a lot of good solutions already, because we have a number of vision-based AI solutions that are really coming along beautifully, and it's going to be a great solution. Physical security / who's there, all aspects of things, of who access what, all those kind of things, we may be in a stage where that they may get solved a lot more with AI and with vision recognition's capabilities. But the next question is, once I'm in the network, how do I how do I poach all those things in my IoT network, and how do I protect all of that assets? That's the next level of opportunity for some of the founders.
I'm also very interested in aside from industrial IoT and some of these physical security pieces and how you protect the network that goes all the way from the edge back into to the wireless companies. I am very curious as to any thoughts you may have on actually consumer security. T-Mobile, for example, had a big security breach over the summer, which if you've been following, folks who know folks, had been happening for quite a while. You've got a lot of personal identity issues with regards to people using their mobile phones. Everything is becoming much more decentralized for people. Your work is now at home. It's not necessarily in an office. Some people are going back to offices, but everything is becoming much more decentralized. And so individual security and consumer security is becoming much more, I think, interesting and relevant. I'm wondering if that has been something that you guys have seen, especially as we enter into the Web3 world, where a lot of people are making big bets on crypto, and your personal security when you're investing in crypto is extremely important, especially if you're doing anything on your mobile network. Anything you guys have seen there, anything interesting in those particular spaces?
I saw an app called, I think it's called Guardian app, if I remember rightly, and that was quite interesting because that safeguards people downloading applications, even well-respected applications that are surprise, surprise, free applications are monetized in some other way, right? There's nothing such as free lunch, so beware of anything that you download for free, and because there's oftentimes they're monetizing your data on the back end, where you've gone, and all that kind of stuff. And so I think the Guardian app was I think first of all, it already has pre-knowledge of what certain applications do, and you can choose to block them. And then it also discovers, net new applications and what they're trying to, what data they're taking off your phone, or, I guess it could be on the desktop as well. And where that's going. So that's from a privacy point of view, you're then in control of where your data goes. So ideal for, if you got teenagers, I guess, that are just getting their phone for the first time and downloading all kinds of stuff, that can draw faces on people's, faces and all that, or whatever they do. There's me showing my age. I've got no idea what they do with these apps,
but I mean, you're right, Mark. It's everything, right? Like if you want to use an app that takes a picture of a document, so scanner app, for example, they're figuring out what you're doing and they're monetizing that.
Yeah.
Your photo, they're doing tons of stuff with that. Facebook just announced that they're shutting down all that stuff because they're getting into too much trouble. So definitely an interesting space, and I think potentially one to watch for a lot of very innovative startups who are able to navigate some of this a little bit more.
Yeah, I think that, yeah, definitely. I mean, there's definitely a market for that, I would imagine, just from my own experience, definitely everyone's interested in privacy now. So
another question off of this topic, but one from Ken, and I'm conscious that I want to make sure I get to all the questions that come from the group here before we end this initial session at 5:20. Ken asks, follow up to my question about FAA and 5G, a Forbes article from November 4th agreed, Verizon and AT&T agreed to delay 5G rollout over FAA concerns on airplane interference. Anybody have any things they've seen on that?
Yeah, no, I think I saw the same article, and I don't know much more than that. It's potentially, I think it's going to cause problems, I think, for urban areas where there's New York springs to mind, right? LaGuardia is right in the middle of New York, so there's a zone around there where there's going to be some interference with some of the bands they're using. So, and that's the spectrum they just bought. So, there might be some court cases going on there, I reckon, because they paid a lot of money for that spectrum, and now they don't get to use it. But it seems like it's going to get resolved. They were delaying by a couple of months to put some, I guess, put some boundaries in place as to where and where not the spectrum can be used. So
I don't see any more questions coming from the group here. I think we're going to move on to the giveaway, and then we'll circle back if anybody has any last questions. But I'd like to say thank you to all of you guys for being such great panelists and for answering a lot of questions. And giving us your insights as to what's hot. Before we get over to Jeremy with the big giveaway, are there any other thoughts you guys have about things we haven't talked about that you're just dying to tell us about? Super, super hot stuff.
I've got a request. I'd like someone to come up with a way to manage all my devices in my home. I'm a big user of SmartThings, but even that's very difficult to use, and you have to be very technically competent, which I'm not, and so I use it hardly at all. But if anyone's got any good ideas on doing that, I'd like to be in more control of my home. My wife, for instance, she just goes around the house shouting expletives at Alexa and various other devices to try and get things to switch on and off. So, so there's a lot of abuse in our house.
And I think in my particular case, I'm the IT manager because I put all these, Control 4 and all the kind of systems on the electrical. Half the time it doesn't work. Wi-Fi is gone, especially when I'm on the road, right? And so and that will be the day my daughter is in town too. Is like, Dad, nothing ever works, right? So you hear all that thing, and there'll be some little system. By the way, my current solution has been to put all this solutions which are like, you can automatically reset from everything. So you reboot all the devices from remote back to the old solution. That's the current day solution for all of it.
The age-old IT solution, turn it off and turn it back on again. Works like
absolutely.
I can do that remotely to all switches, all devices now.
Check out the chat, guys, if you want some entertainment. There's some good ones in here as well. So I think we'll move back on to Jeremy, but thank you again, guys, for everything. It's been a wonderful conversation, and I look forward to hearing any last questions from the crowd in a few minutes.
Thanks very much, Lisa. This is great.
Yeah, echoed.
So thanks, Lisa, and thanks everybody on the panel. We'll have a little bit of time after this, but I wanted to announce the winner of our giveaway, these barbecue gloves. It's Tim Hansen. And Tim, if you can just send me your email and your address in a chat to me, we can get those out to you. So I really appreciate it, and I'll give it back to you guys. And I think we got about 10 more minutes left in this webinar. If you want to have any last.
I would like to request
thoughts
for next year that Tim, please send us the footage of your hands going into 932-degree temperature with those gloves. And let us know how you're feeling.
Exactly.
That's a really, please don't. That sounds I don't want anyone coming back to me.
Yes, later. that is the boil the turkey in oil answer here.
Yes, if it's going to get to him before he makes his turducken this week or next week.
He said he won't do that. Okay, good. Okay. We got that recorded. Thank goodness.
Awesome, Tim. Glad you know how to take a joke. All right.
I have one question, if I may, as president of the WCA. First of all, thank you. And I joined late because of a doctor appointment. It would not be a meeting and a conference around IoT if I would not ask this question. With all these trillions, billions, or whatever connected IoT devices, who is in charge when something will go wrong? And I ask you since 5 or 6 years. Lisa may remember this question. I didn't get a right answer. Perhaps Mark, Joseph, Henry, G, and Tricia, probably you have something.
So there's a whole pile of observability, monitorability, and debugging functionality that exists in cloud networking that's now making its way into edge IoT devices. So what it means is, so for example, Google has an open source project, Istio, that they put out, which is used by a number of people for debugging, tracking, monitoring, and aspect of things, right? And there's an AI engine which is determining what is at fault. So most of these native cloud orchestration enablement technology that's out there today in 5G, 4G, whatever telco operations that's going to be on native cloud will also subsume the same functionality that has been done in cloud in determining it's this, servers, this rack, this place, that same thing is going to be expanded and added with multiple thousands of events coming in and happening. This is, in the next version of one of our company's product, I know that's why I'm kind of quoting you that, but we're going to have that debuggability, observability aspects of what has been done in cloud being applied to native cloud and for telco to be able to manage it at a much more efficient level. And this will be then used by IoT services that are provided to be able to track it and say Mark's IoT device or Tricia's IoT device is not working, and give you suggestions. Because today, the answer may be that, Tricia, somebody is putting it right next to a place where, there's no RF signal or Wi-Fi signal. There's no intelligence to understand this. So the failure and debugging is becoming a very big problem. A lot of this is where AI is going to help substantially. And this is where we're going to see a number of AI come. By the way, this is things that are in the final product versions of some of these many companies. It'll take probably a couple of years before which it's actually ready for a lot of companies to consume. But we are at the cusp of getting these used to manage, monitor, debug, and analyze all these things using AI as a solution to do that, right? It's a perfect.
You're saying there will not be one person, it will be more an AI solution. So Arnold Schwarzenegger, show me the hand, and so is doing this automatically. There's no Mr. President, whoever that is.
Yeah,
press a button and say, okay, everything shut off.
Now we can all debate here and say AI is going to have its own biases and in the model, etc. That's a different problem that exists across all AI problem. I'm sure we could say that Facebook's AI algorithms is posting things that should be this way, etc. I'm sure there's going to be debate on that, but I'm saying there's going to be a first set of solution, which is great. And every time there's one message which says it's so-and-so's IoT is failing because of this issue, and it is not because of this issue, there will be a hue and cry about it. But that is what the way we are going to do. It's an area where AI is perfect for applying, because you have these trillion devices coming in, data is coming in, you are actually recording the data. You should be able to do a lot of debugging, and it'll remove vast amounts of problems that people have.
But not just the debugging. I think it'll all be given to you as a service. You'll type in the names of your products. It'll, extrapolate the back end, the APIs, tell you what those problems are that other customers have. It's the replacement for all of us Googling, like, what's wrong with my, cable box, right?
I mean,
that'll be a $20 a month service that somebody's supplying to you.
And it may be, some of these companies will be providing debuggability or whatever, monitoring, debugging, and tracking as a service, which will be used by many applications. And every time you're using that particular application and their IoTs, you will get a message. They will be paying some amount to these guys. So the whole food chain will happen to do this. But it is what you're raising, Peter, is a great problem for AI to nail a lot of these issues. Now, you can come back to me and later say, well, the model was not that accurate, this had issues, but that's the general problem of AI that we are going to be discussing for a little while here.
So I have one last question for all of you, and it's going to be a super fast one. You have like 15 seconds, maybe 30 seconds each. So if you had to quit your job tomorrow, and money was no object, but you had to quit your job tomorrow, and you could raise whatever money you needed for something new, what would be the company that you would start as it relates to wireless? So what is the big problem you want to have solved that you would solve tomorrow if you could? Starting with Yi. You're immediately to my right there, Yi.
Well, so as you were saying it, the first thing that came to my mind is I really like wireless power. I think just like Wi-Fi has sort of allowed us to have all these devices, personal devices, industrial devices. I think the wireless power with all these automation, all these robots, even electric vehicles that are on the road and in the warehouse, that is where I think the future is going to lie. Now, whether you can get through all the regulatory and technological hurdles, but let's just say that doesn't happen, that, it doesn't get in the way, I should say. That's something that I think is really sort of next level. That's my opinion.
Awesome. Moving on to Tricia, who's the Brady Bunch box just below.
Yes. So I would love to walk into my house and have every device on my phone, with status and, is it working and are they interoperable despite device manufacturers, and be able, I guess, you know, to Rajiv's point, be able to reboot them on command remotely. You know, that would be, you know, it'd save me a lot of hassle with the rest of my family too.
Great. How about you, Henry?
I would say, you know, smart home, smart infrastructure, which will be enabled by the wireless technology innovation. I mean, the innovation of wireless networking itself, you know, there's a lot of interesting opportunities and the stuff out there. But what's beyond that is really, you know, the technology itself, what it can enable in many other industries.
Mark?
Yeah, they stole my thunder. I like all of those three. I mentioned, you know, I've got real problems with my smart home, which is too smart for me, or I'm not smart enough or something. But and I like I do like the wireless power. I just keep thinking about, you know, what Rajiv was saying earlier on about, you know, going out for a run. When I go out, you know, I've got rechargeable batteries for my lights, for my bike, for my cycle when I go out. And of course, they're never charged when I want to use them. But the rechargeable batteries, so it's worse than just replacing the batteries. I have to wait 30 minutes for them to charge back up again, so I can then go out my bike in the dark, or in the potential dark. So I like the wireless charging. I like my smart home to be fixed, and I'd like to have stop worrying about this coverage all the time, and let's just have Wi-Fi working all the time, and let's have well, whatever it is, 5G, 6G, 7G working all the time as well.
I feel you on that one. And Rajiv, last but certainly not least.
Yes, see, for me, you know, I'm certainly being able to invest in some of these early companies like at Mosaic and on the wireless power side, etc. It's. I mean, I was there when the company did not have a pitch deck, and being able to do that, to see it turn into fruition. I'm leaving some of my dreams on all these companies, certainly as a startup investor. But having said that, I actually would, if you told me, you know, you don't have to work and done, I would find a way to be able to get out of being so addicted to the phone. Actually, I would look for technologies that could give me 30 minutes a day. I mean, my record, and I mean, I use Apple and I look at screens, you know, time, etc. My daughters always tell me, "Gee, Dad, this is crazy. You got to do it." So I actually think that I'm on time to do something which helps me take away from my addiction to all these mobile platforms and devices. You know, I'm so much into it that you know, it's time to get out. So if you ask me, you know, don't do anything, I would find 30 minutes of my time every day out of this thing would be where I'm not at all under any pressure to touch it. Will be a fantastic dream to have.
Well, thank you again, everyone. These are all great answers, and I'm sure we'll have a lot of entrepreneurs in attendance here. We'll try to make these things happen for us all very soon. Really appreciate everyone's time, and best for happy holiday season, including Thanksgiving next week.
Thanks very much, Lisa.
Yeah. Thank you, Lisa.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate everyone joining, and have a great holiday.
Thanks, you
Thanks,
guys too.
Jeremy. Yes, yeah, really appreciate you, Peter,
Everybody.
myself, putting it all together.
Take care.
All right, take care.
All right.